And hello, welcome to Kelowna Now Live. My name is Jason Mann. We're broadcasting live on YouTube and X. And one of the most important voices on the topic of addiction and trauma today is Dr. Gabor Mate. His views are becoming more and more well-known as he's been interviewed by high-profile podcasters like Rich Roll, Jay Shetty, Jordan Peterson, Tom Ferriss, Tom Bilyeu, even Joe Rogan. But his views are still far from mainstream, I guess. Gabor is coming to Kelowna this coming up Friday to speak on the myth of normal, and this is being presented by the Peyton and Dylan Budd Memorial Fund. It's a fundraiser for Ozanam Recovery House. And today I have Jamie Dale Walters, the house and program manager for Ozanam Recovery House, with us here at Kelowna Now. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. I just want to talk about Gabor, the event, and Ozanam in a moment. But first, for those who are not aware of Gabor and who he is, I have a short 3-minute clip that I'd like to share.
All the substances of abuse, whether they're opiates or cocaine or anything else, they're actually painkillers. Some of them specifically are painkillers. But physical pain and emotional pain, the suffering is experienced in the same part of the brain. So when people suffer emotional rejection, the same part of the brain will light up as if you stuck them with a knife. The Eckhart Tolle says very nicely that addictions begin with pain and end with pain. So that all the addictions are attempts to soothe the pain. So when I work with addictions, the first question is always not why the addiction, but why the pain. And what you find is emotional loss or trauma. In the case of the severe addicts, as in the downtown East Side here, they were every single one of them traumatized. There's no women walking the streets here who had not been sexually abused, not even by accident. But you know, whether it's a sex addiction or internet or relationship or shopping or work addiction, these are all attempts to get away from distress. Keith Richards, the Rolling Stone guitarist, said, who used to have a severe heroin habit, as you know, he said that all the contortions we go through just not to be ourselves for a few hours. Or why would somebody not want to be themselves? Because they're in too much distress and too much pain. So I don't care what they tell you about genetics or any of that choices or any of that nonsense. It's always about pain. Well, the Tibetan Book of Living and Dying, it's got a wonderful line in it. Whatever you do, don't try and escape from your pain, but be with it. Because the attempt to escape from pain is what creates more pain. And that's the reality with addiction. But the question is, how can people be with their pain? Well, only if they sense some compassion from somebody. So as another teacher says, only when compassion is present will people allow themselves to see the truth. So addicted people need a compassionate present which will permit them to experience their pain without having to run away from it. And all the attempts to run away, it's like another teacher says, the surest way to go to hell is to try to run away from hell. So you got to be with that pain. You just have to be with it, but you have to have some support. And we live in a society that one way or the other is always about instant relief, quick satisfaction, distraction. In other words, we live in a culture that is based on, both economically and psychologically, on not supporting people to be with themselves. So it's always the quick getaway. So it's very difficult to deal with addictions in a society. But yeah, it is a matter of, at some point, finding a way of being with your pain so that you can actually get to know what it's really all about.
Okay. So I remember hearing Gabor for the first time, and it was probably around 2007. And I remember it so clearly because it was such a stark contrast to everything that I had grown up knowing and thinking. It's you watch a clip like that, and it gets to me a little bit.
Yeah, it sure does.
Anyways, I guess the question is, you know, how does it resonate for you, that message? I guess we'll start there.
Well, that is for sure it. And that's basically what we do at the Recovery House, at Ozanam Recovery House, is we hire compassionate people who can witness people in their pain. Because that's ultimately what it comes down to. And it's for each of us. How does somebody become compassionate? Somebody witnessed them in their pain. And that's what's happened for us, and that's ultimately what we do.
I think the thing I was trying to get to there too was, you know, growing up, we're somewhere in the same age group, but you know, growing up, addiction was a disease. It's genetic. It's bad. It's even criminal. People are in jail for it. People are getting charged for it. And then you hear a message like that. And it's not a mainstream message. How did he come about discovering this? And when I say this, I mean, I assume it's the truth, because I feel like intuitively when I heard that message, it felt like that is what addiction is, right? And society's approach to handling addiction seems to be quite wrong. And so I guess, I don't know where the question is leading me to here, but I guess the question is, at Ozanam, how are you taking, I guess, this philosophy? Are you working with this philosophy?
Yeah, so I guess maybe if we can backtrack a little bit. So 20 years ago, 2003, I was in Vancouver's downtown east side myself, my hometown, looking for a job as a mental health worker. And I got a job with a nonprofit, and the doctor there just happened to be Dr. Gabor Mate. And he had these ideas even back then, or at least he was forming them as he was working with his clients there, the residents that we had. And like he said in the video there weren't any addicts that didn't have trauma, like severe trauma. And so he started working with that. And, you know, so I wouldn't say I was a peer of his. I mean, I got a job as a entry-level mental health worker, and he was a fairly prominent doctor at that time. But his ideas spread, and we were able to do workshops with him fairly regularly. And so basically in 2013, 10 years later after that, I moved up here to Kelowna, up to Ozanam Recovery House, because I had told them the ideas that I had that were based on these ideas, also on the nonprofit, where they had spoken about, you know, while we're helping people, and we certainly are, we're not crusading to save people. It's more about learning, and I think the key here is learning how to be human beings, walking with other human beings, right? Because addiction is just one side of the coin. Right? The people trying to crusade for the people that have the addiction are the other side of the coin, right? And they're feeling just as much pain, and everybody's trying to escape it. And so at some point we have to sit and be with that. And so somebody did with me, and then the board of directors where I interviewed at Ozanam Recovery House, they really liked those ideas. And I was like, well, okay, 3 weeks later, I was hiring a moving truck and moving my family up here from, you know, my hometown to implement these ideas. And then I guess I could further say, unless you want to interject something there, for the last 10 years there, I've been working with our assistant manager, Dawn, who recently, over the last few years, has been taking Gabor's Compassionate Inquiry program, which is based exactly on what he's talking about there, that like you need somebody compassionate, you need a compassionate person to listen with empathy to what's going on for that person. And that's really where the magic of healing happens. And we also know that from like Alcoholics Anonymous in 1935, like alcoholics were hopeless. Sigmund Freud would not see alcoholics because they were hopeless. But when Alcoholics Anonymous came along, there was something about one alcoholic talking to another that made the difference. It wasn't a doctor, it wasn't a lawyer or a judge or somebody preaching down or a psychologist. And there seems to be something about the shame not being there, right? That there's a level playing ground. And so that's where somebody compassionate, being able to listen with empathy to someone, is where the healing comes. And then the hope being is that that person will then become compassionate enough to help others. And we see it every day, even just today. I mean, I was doing a recovery workshop with the guys at the house, and one guy was moving through it. He had something stolen from him at the house. And he actually, by the end of it, like he said, he was literally having a conversation with himself where he wanted to go up and smash the kitchen, like dump over the fridge and pull out the pots and pans. And I'm like, I'm relating. I'm like, me too. So I don't want to invalidate his feeling. Yeah. But then he goes on to talk about how there was another aspect of himself that was, letting him know that it was okay. And like a higher aspect, I guess, of himself, right? And so those changes are happening, is what I'm saying, daily in the house when you can create a space for it, right? Mm-hmm.
How many people are in the house?
We have 19 beds.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how do people find you, or what are the typical path or route to people finding you?
Right. So most of it is word of mouth. We do, we have relationships with the detox and with the treatment centers, also with jails. And so we get referrals from all those places. A lot of repeat people. So, like as far as statistics go, like recovery-wise, if abstinence is our only marker of success, then we're looking at about a 3 to 5% recovery rate, just like anywhere in the house. There was this worker, worked for the Ministry of Social Development, and he would come by weekly and check in with our guys, and he would kind of sarcastically, or not sarcastically, but kind of out of this tongue in cheek, I guess, he would say, people give me these stories about success rates, but like, I know every single place is 3 to 5%. I don't care what mumbo jumbo they tell me. And I thought, okay, well, that's fine. But the thing is, we started an alumni program where we started following guys after, and guys would come back. And so what we discovered is abstinence for sure is the goal in a recovery house, but there are other markers of success. So, for example, if you were previously homeless and now you have housing, or if you've never been a part of a recovery program, but now you are, or maybe you never had any sponsorship or mentorship out in the community, and now you do. Maybe you never addressed mental health issues, but now you're seeing a psychiatrist or a psychologist. I mean, these are all markers of success, and everybody's on the continuum somewhere. So at any rate, when we use those markers, we can boast, like, I think 86% success rate.
So progress. It's
progress. You're moving along, and sometimes we see guys 2, 3, even 4 or 5 times, before it really clicks for them.
What kind of support are you providing in the house? Like, where does it end? Where does it begin?
Yeah, so it really begins, and it begins with the programming. So guys come in, there's 3 months of workshops that they need to do, and so we get into really some of those core issues slowly as people are ready, because one of the things I'll ask the guys first off is, do you know that drugs and alcohol are not actually the problem? And I got to tell you, like, most addicts, they get that. Once they've hit a certain bottom, they're like, yeah, that's not the problem, because they keep going back, right? So obviously there's some payoff. I mean, ultimately what it works out to is medicating the pain, which is what Gabor Mate is alluding to there, is that you're medicating the pain. And so ultimately when you take away the medicine, you're just left with the raw problem, which is why you need people to be that buffer for you, right? Sorry, what was your question?
Yeah, just
I've gone off on a tangent.
How you support the folks in the house.
Right. So we have the recovery program where we get people in touch with themselves and each other, so that everybody knows that that's what's going on. Everybody's on the same page, right? It's not just about stopping with the booze or the drugs or whatever the behavior happens to be. But there are other things. So professional, competent, and compassionate. That's the most important thing. Staff. And then, meals. So we have one home-cooked meal, like we do dinner every single night at 5:00. And so it's a place where a time when the whole house gets together and, we break bread. And so it's very
community, sense of community.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And so folks are coming to you from jail, from the street, like with the tiny home, and the homeless here find their way to you eventually. I worry about that a little bit, in as much that I don't feel like there is necessarily a path, and I worry about a building village there, which doesn't look to be supported emotionally in any way.
Right.
So anyways, I wonder, if that is a path for people to get to you. And
Yeah, so the house originally opened as what would be called a second stage recovery house. And at that time, that was in 2007, there was a requirement of 30 days abstinence and having completed a treatment program in the last year. And so, but Crossroads closed down right around when I came up in 2013. And so the board of directors, they saw a need in the community, and that's always that's why the house started in the first place, was because there was a need for it. And so they saw a need now for like treatment. And so that's when I came on board, and we started a recovery program, kind of first stage. I wouldn't call it treatment per se, but it was a first stage program to sort of fill the need in the community. So basically, as long as you're detoxed off of all the drugs, we do a urine sample like coming in to test for that. And if you're clean, then you can come in. Abstinent, that is.
Yeah.
We tend to use not the word clean anymore.
Right. And so we were sort of talking about success and success rate there. Do you have what kind of anecdotal story could you share just in terms of the difference the organization is making?
Yeah, so we actually, because of this event, there's been some interviews going on, and we had an alumni resident come in, and he's got several years of recovery now and has started his own business. And, one of the things he says is that it was the space where he was allowed to figure himself out. Of course, we're guiding him, and we have directions about, this is what you need to do and what you don't need to do. And also red flags. Like if we see something that's like a hallmark of somebody that's headed toward relapse, we'd be negligent if we didn't say something, right? But often it doesn't get heeded, but at least we say something. But in his case, he took that in and mauled on it for days and sometimes weeks, because you can stay for up to 2 years in our program. And so that's what he talked about, is the space. And I think any of the guys that have multiple years now would speak to that space. We provide that. But then the other thing is, I'm always harping on about connection. Like they need to build connections. We all need it. We can't exist without some sort of community or posse around us to help us navigate the ups and downs of life. So,
and addiction can be isolating in a way, right?
Yeah. Well, so Johann Hari wrote a book called Chasing the Scream, and in there he says the opposite of addiction is not sobriety; it's human connection. And I intuitively knew that was right, but I've pondered it for a while since then. And what I've come to realize is that isolation is actually the first behavioral indicator of an addiction. So before there's any substance involved, there's some form of isolation. And usually that isolation is in the form of like a secret, in the sense that, you go to school or you talk to family and you share some personal thing that happened. Maybe it's a romance with a girl or something like that. And if you get ridiculed and you have nobody to talk to, and if that happens in your family of origin, all the worse, because where are you going to go? Or in your school. I had both of those in my case, right? So, I could really relate to it, is that I knew it wasn't safe to share my really honest, vulnerable feelings, certainly not at school. And then I learned even somewhat with my parents, it wasn't really safe to do so. And so then we carry that with us, and that's how the isolation starts. And so, also Gabor talked in the video there about how they're trying to escape themselves. That's what the addict is trying to do. Now, plenty of people get drugs like deluxe heroin called morphine in the hospital, like tens of thousands every year, and they don't become addicts when they come out. And when I've spoken to people like that, predominantly the reason they don't like morphine is because it takes them out of themselves. They like who they are. They can talk to mom and dad. They've got a group of friends. They don't want to be taken out of themselves. Whereas for the addict, that's exactly the reason they do take the drugs, is to be taken out of themselves. Which brings us back to the isolation, is that first it's about guarding the secret, but then it just snowballs from there. And so not only is the first behavioral indicator of an addiction isolation, but the end result for every addict is total isolation for the addict. And meaning like the inability to relate to even one human being. Can't relate to anybody, to be isolated in a room full of people. So that being said, addiction is encompassed in isolation. It's the alpha and the omega, if you will, of addiction. And that's why the opposite of addiction is not sobriety, but the opposite of isolation, which is connection.
Wow.
So that's why I'm always on that with the guys, right?
Yeah. What do you find the biggest challenge in supporting and helping people overcome addiction is?
Yeah. The biggest challenge really is getting into those core hurts, because who wants to do it, right? I mean, you'd think there's some pretty low bottoms that happen in addiction, especially if it's street level. And so you'd think at that point, okay, I'm going to face it. But it's like the fear and the pain of facing yourself is like pretty great. And until the pain of the addiction gets greater than that, we're always going to sort of go to the addiction. And so it's like, how bad is it, Like it's a kind of a cliche in like 12-step recovery programs where it's like, on this one side, you've got a happy, joyous, and free life. And on this side, you've got a slow, drug-addicted, alcoholic, painful death, And for any rational person, it's a no-brainer, right? Only for the hardcore addict are they like, well, how much pain is it? It's even like happy, joyous, and free life, right? Because what you have to face is immense. And so that's really the biggest challenge is how do you navigate that? How do we even navigate it in our culture when everything, as Gabor is saying, is built on a quick fix and just get over it now, push it down, get off and do your thing, right? How do you get into that? It's very, very tricky, right?
Well, in his topic, he's going to be speaking on it. It looks like it's going to be the myth of normal. And I spent a lot of time just in the last few years reflecting on all the people I know and have, formed some depth of relationship with. And everyone, some of society's brightest shining people, contributors, stars, all have some sort of, I don't know, hurt, wound, something that's toxic, something that's, you know what I mean? Like, and so when he talks about sort of like toxic society and toxic
culture,
culture, I would think like some of that might be in the way of overcoming these things as well. Because like, how can we support each other if the whole culture is toxic?
Well, this is exactly it. And that's where compassionate people come in. And the compassionate people come from facing ourselves. But as he says, you need those supports. You need people around you. So it's not easy. And especially if we're successful materially, it becomes even more difficult then to really get into those deep hurts and wounds. But, life has a way. Life has a way. And it's like, what I can see is people are really starting to cry out for the real substance of life. And that substance is to be found inside each of us. And so call it what you will. We need to reach out down and muster whatever soul forces we might have to bring balance and equanimity to our lives. Because currently what we're doing is we're trying to take things from the outside, whether it's drugs or alcohol or entertainment or whatever it might be, sugar, caffeine, trying to balance ourselves, just the right amount of this and that, and I'll take that in, and I'll go to this party and whatever. And we maintain that balance outwardly. But really what we need to do is be reaching down into ourselves and try to find that place of balance.
I'd be curious to know what Gabor's take is, and maybe just like, because I know he talks a little bit about like addiction can find its way into many aspects of your life. It's not necessarily going to be drugs and alcohol. It might be work. It might be exercise. It might be shopping in his case. What was my question? I guess are those better? Are those better outlets? Like, or should we be stopping and looking at ourselves anyways and going through this process, I guess?
Yeah. So you might argue that they're better. But I think that ultimately it's an inside job, like each of us needs to go through.
Because it seems to me like a lot of people might have like an addiction, but they don't even realize it. And then in what way could they use that to either compassionately identify with somebody who's got another type of addiction, or should they even be looking at their own addiction, I guess, is sort of the question.
Yeah. Well, one thing I will say is that I like Gabor's definition of addiction the best of most that I've heard. And I'm probably misquoting it, but essentially it's that it's continued use of a substance or a behavior despite repeated negative consequences. Mm-hmm. And I like the repeated negative consequences because, if you're just doing something a lot, that's not necessarily addictive, right? Mm-hmm. It's when the negative consequences don't stop you and you keep on going is when you're really into you've moved out of a compulsion into an actual addiction. Although we would say substance use disorder at this point, but that's essentially what's happening. And so while all of these things are taking us out of ourselves, they're not necessarily as debilitating as some of the other things. But that being said, if workaholism is the addiction, then that's basically supported by society. I mean, you're like, just keep going.
Have another
like
coffee.
You're the most successful person, right? That's where this outward material success can be a real detriment because, that person, I mean, they could be doing great work, but they may be, rotting on the inside. And so, and the only one that can tell that is the person themselves.
Yeah, or those negative consequences might be lack of connection or relationship with their wife or their kids and the damage that might cause, I guess, right?
Well, it's all that separation, right? And then the problem is that that's where you get this culture who doesn't really we don't take care of ourselves. We're like, oh, there's a government program for that, or there's something, right? Like, this news organization is not government funded.
Correct. Yeah,
right?
We're independent.
And so the house that we're at, it's a project of the Society of St. Vincent de Paul. I mean, we are partnered with BC Housing somewhat, and ministry funding does pay for most of our guys, right? But like, we're trying to really step out. Like my board of directors are volunteers. Like they've done this because they see the need in the community and they want to give back in that way. And also, I think a testament to their faith is that there's no requirement of faith to come to our house, right? Like, it's like, come on in, let us create some space for you to figure out you. I think know thyself is one of the spiritual axioms that kind of crosses all religions and denominations, right? And I think it's something that we can land on that really would behoove and benefit, all of us.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking of funding, obviously this is a fundraiser, this event. Are there other ways the community can contribute to what you do?
Yeah, so our website, recoverykelowna.ca, we have information on the event. The event is sold out, but there are some live stream tickets. By live stream, I mean there'll be an overflow room there, and there'll be seats in there. It won't be broadcast outside of the building. But there's also a place.
And those tickets are on Eventbrite?
They're on Eventbrite, but you can click to that through our website, or you can go straight to Eventbrite. It's gabormate.eventbrite.com, I believe. But there's also a donate button on the website. So this gift that Gabor is generously giving to us is incredible. Like, we're nearing the $100,000 mark for this event, and it's really a great boon to our house. Like, we've been having some struggles over the last few years. I mean, most nonprofits do, but some specific stuff, and that's partially why Gabor offered to help us out. And so this is really going to dig us out of that, but it's also going to add to our programming, which is something that we've wanted to kind of build up and make a little bit more robust, add some more people in the programming. And then also cost of living has gone up quite a lot, and I think it's important that we pay the staff. I mean, to do the work that they do is incredibly challenging, and so that's where all the money's going to go. And because we do the fundraising ourselves, like, we didn't have a fundraiser go and round up Dr. Mate and schmooze him with money or anything like that. Like, it was a compassionate thing where one of his, Dawn our assistant manager, happens to be a student in his compassionate inquiry program, and so she, as a part of her kind of inner journey, asked him about that. And so so he's offered to do that, which is a real bonus. But the point being is we don't have fundraisers, we don't have grant writers, and so 100% of the money is going into our program and to our guys. There's no hidden administration costs or anything like that.
Yeah. Okay. Amazing.
Yeah.
So people can donate off the website. It is a full house. How many tickets? Like maybe a couple dozen, a few dozen left for the
There's probably 50.
50. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you're interested in seeing Dr. Gabor Mate and his speech here on Friday, it's just coming up here this Friday. Head on over to the website and give us that address again.
It's recoverykelowna.ca.
recoverykelowna.ca. And I know that you won't be disappointed. Is there a final message or key point that you'd like to share with everybody about the event or about Ozanam?
Well, nope, just my gratitude to Gabor for doing this, and to the team, to my board of directors. Like, you know, the way that this is unfolding is absolutely miraculous in my eyes, and the timing of it. And so I just generally like to encourage people to continue to do the work, because the thing is, we can get down on our toxic culture and all of that, but it's like at the end of the day, everybody's doing the best they can to kind of get into it and do the thing. And I think the more that we heal and the more that we share this message of healing, the more it's going to resonate with somebody. Somebody's going to hear something and call somebody, and it's just, we're going to get better.
Yeah.
It's what's happening. We're in that time. Maybe we're in a new renaissance or something.
Yeah, let's hope. Let's hope. And, you know, I mean, hopefully people will, this population of homeless that has, you know, sort of grown quite a bit in the last couple of years here in Kelowna, you know, there's a lot of eyes on that as that sort of evolves, that situation. But hopefully those eyes and everybody can be a little bit more compassionate as a result of, you know, this interview and having Dr. Gabor here, you know, sharing his message as well with many others. And as we just learn more about what addiction is all about. So I appreciate you and everything you're doing and for coming in.
Thank you.
Indeed. Again, KelownaRecoveryHouse.ca. Jamie Dale Walters, the House and Program Manager of Ozanam Recovery House, here with us today. Thank you very much. And get your tickets for Dr. Gabor Mate. It will be quite the event. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Okay.